For a bit of context, I'm Ethan, a 22-year-old guy with an older sister named Lily, who's 24. Growing up, Lily was always the golden child. Our parents adored her and treated her like royalty. Everything she did was celebrated. Even the smallest accomplishments were showered with praise. I'll admit that dynamic shaped how I saw myself in the family, the one expected to manage on my own. Lily was supposed to graduate college last year, but things didn't quite go according to plan. She dropped out during her final year. This wasn't a case of her flunking out or the school booting her for poor performance, though her grades and attendance were borderline. No, it was her choice. She left college to chase her dream of being a musician. This wasn't some calculated risk. It was more of a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had joined a band with some college friends during her sophomore year. I think she fell in love with the idea of being a rock star, living off adrenaline and applause. But honestly, everyone in the family could see it for what it was, a phase. Still, nobody said anything. Not me, not my parents. I didn't feel it was my place, and even if I had, I doubt Lily would have appreciated my advice. She'd probably have brushed me off, claiming I didn't understand her passion. Instead of discouraging her, our parents cheered her on. They told her to follow her heart and to pursue her dreams. It was baffled. Lily wasn't even a great singer. She was an okay shower performer at best. The rest of the band, though, they had actual talent. I never understood why they even kept her around. But life has a way of sorting things out. Within 6 months of dropping out, Lily was kicked out of the band. They found a better vocalist who not only had a stronger voice, but also wrote her own lyrics. That rejection crushed her. She came back home, her dreams in tatters, without a degree or any real plan for the future. At first, she tried to start her own band, but no one was interested. None of her friends were musicians, and understandably, no one was willing to abandon their own aspirations to gamble on hers. She's been living with our parents ever since, unemployed and contributing nothing. What stung the most wasn't her decisions. It was how our parents handled it. They coddled her. They acted like she'd been through some devastating trauma and needed time to recover. I didn't see it that way at all. In my eyes, she was facing the consequences of her actions. She'd made a poor choice, and now she had to live with it. Meanwhile, I was reminded daily of how unfair our family dynamic was. When I graduated high school, my parents made it clear that I was on my own financially. They didn't help me with tuition or living expenses, and that wasn't surprising. They hadn't helped Lily either, but now they were bending over backward to support her, letting her live rent-free and funding her lifestyle. It didn't sit right with me. I worked multiple part-time jobs while studying, and I took out loans to cover the rest. I never complained about it because I'd accepted that was just how things were. But seeing Lily treated so differently felt like a slap in the face. I tried to talk to my parents about it. I brought up how unfair it was that they were enabling her laziness while I had to scrape by. Each conversation turned into an argument, and they'd always twist things to make me feel guilty for bringing it up. They'd say I was selfish, that Lily needed them more than I did. Eventually, I gave up trying to change their minds. I focused on getting through college on my own. But then, something happened that pushed me to my breaking point. It was about a week ago when I invited my parents to my graduation ceremony. It was a huge milestone for me, and I wanted them to be there to celebrate it. My campus is only a 2-hour drive from home, so I thought it would be an easy yes. But instead of being excited for me, they started making excuses. They claimed they couldn't take a day off work, which was ridiculous. My graduation was on a weekend, and even if it weren't, one day off wouldn't hurt. Finally, after some back and forth, the truth came out. They weren't planning to come because they had other plans, a surprise party for Lily. Turns out the day of my graduation coincided with the day Lily would have graduated if she hadn't dropped out. She'd been feeling down about her decisions, so my parents decided to throw her a party to cheer her up. Hearing that broke something in me. They were skipping my graduation, a once-in-a-lifetime event, to celebrate Lily's dropout anniversary. I tried to reason with them. I told them they could reschedule her party for another day, but they refused. They said I needed to understand why Lily needed their support more than I did. It was like a switch flipped in my mind. I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be their priority. Their world revolved around Lily, and I was just an afterthought. After that phone call with my parents, I was furious. I couldn't believe they were serious about skipping my graduation. A party for Lily, who didn't even finish college, was more important than my achievement? It felt like the ultimate slap in the face. I tried to stay calm, but my emotions got the better of me. I told them exactly how I felt, that they were terrible parents who always prioritized Lily over me, no matter the situation. I said their constant coddling was the reason she never grew up or took responsibility for her life. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself. Their reaction? More of the same excuses. They said I was overreacting and being selfish. They didn't even try to hide their favoritism. My mom outright said, "Jackie needs us more than you do, Ethan. She's going through a hard time." A hard time? Are you kidding me? She made terrible choices and now had to live with the consequences. Meanwhile, I worked my ass off to make something of myself, and instead of acknowledging that, they were throwing a pity party for her. I couldn't listen to them anymore, so I hung up. At that point, I felt completely alone. But then I remembered my grandparents. My dad's parents have always been my rock. They're kind, supportive, and have stepped in for me when my parents wouldn't. They even co-signed my student loans because I didn't want to ask my parents for help. So I called them. When they picked up, I didn't even get through the whole story before I broke down crying. It wasn't just about the graduation. It was everything. Years of feeling like I didn't matter. Years of being the afterthought to Lily's every whim. My grandparents were furious. They apologized on behalf of my parents, which made me cry even harder. I kept telling them it wasn't their fault, but they still felt guilty for not stepping in sooner. After calming me down, they reassured me they'd be at my graduation, no matter what. Then, my grandpa said something I wasn't expecting. "Your parents need to pay for what they've done. They've been taking advantage of us for too long." I was confused at first. What did he mean by taking advantage? That's when they explained the truth. For the past year, my grandparents have been sending money to my parents to help with Lily. My dad had told them that Lily was trying to get her life together and just needed some support to get back on her feet. My grandparents believed him, thinking they were helping a struggling granddaughter. But the truth, Lily wasn't trying to get a job or do anything productive. She was just lounging around, going out with friends and living off my parents. And my parents? They were lying to my grandparents to keep the money flowing. Hearing that made my blood boil. It was one thing for them to favor Lily over me, but to manipulate my grandparents like that, it was disgusting. My grandparents didn't hold back. They told me they were going to confront my parents and put an end to this once and for all. I begged them not to get involved, but they wouldn't hear it. They said it was time someone stood up for me. A few hours later, my dad called. The moment I picked up, he started yelling, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" He shouted. I had no clue what he was talking about. I told him to calm down and explain, but he just kept accusing me of being selfish and manipulative. Finally, he admitted what had happened. After my call with my grandparents, they'd driven over to my parents' house and unleashed years of pent-up frustration. My grandpa called my parents leeches and accused them of taking advantage of their kindness. He even called Lily a lazy, brainless cow. Harsh, maybe. But was he wrong? Not really. They told my parents they were cutting them off financially. No more handouts, no more helping Lily. Instead, they said they were going to support me from now on. When my dad mentioned that last part, I couldn't help but laugh. Of course, that's why he was so angry. It wasn't about the confrontation or the name-calling. It was about the money. They were furious because they'd lost their safety net. I hung up on him and called my grandparents to confirm what my dad had said. They told me it was true. They were done enabling my parents and Lily, and they wanted to help me instead. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. I've always prided myself on being independent, and accepting money felt strange. But my grandparents insisted. They said it was their way of making up for everything I'd been through. "You deserve a break, Ethan," my grandpa said. "Let us do this for you." And honestly, he was right. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove I didn't need anyone, but maybe it was okay to accept help from the people who truly cared about me. So I agreed. The next morning, I blocked my parents and Lily on everything. I didn't want to deal with their guilt trips or manipulation. For the first time in years, I felt free. This wasn't the end of the story, far from it, but for now, I was finally standing up for myself. Blocking my parents and Lily felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in their manipulation or guilt-tripping. It was freeing, but also unsettling. I wasn't used to putting myself first. Still, I knew I couldn't let them drag me back into the toxic cycle I'd lived through for years. A few days later, my phone blew up with missed calls and messages. At first, I ignored them, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened one message from an unknown number, and it was from Lily. She was furious. She'd gone on a full-blown rant about how selfish I was, accusing me of ruining our family. She called me ungrateful and entitled, and even went so far as to say she was ashamed to call me her brother. The irony wasn't lost on me. Turns out she hadn't stopped there. She'd also taken to social media to air our dirty laundry. Her posts painted a picture of me as a spoiled brat who was jealous of her and trying to turn our grandparents against our parents. She claimed I was bitter about their love for her and was now manipulating everyone for money. I couldn't believe the audacity. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but then I saw the comments. People we'd grown up with, old classmates, mutual friends, were chiming in. Some defended me, saying they'd seen how our parents treated us differently. But others sided with Lily, calling me out for betraying my family. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I made my own post, laying out the truth. I explained how my parents had always favored Lily, how they'd let her coast through life while I had to struggle on my own. I talked about the years of emotional neglect and how they'd chosen to skip my graduation for a party for Lily, a party she didn't even know about. I kept it factual and straightforward, but I didn't hold back. The fallout was immediate. Friends started messaging me, shocked by the details. Some apologized for doubting me. Others shared stories about how they'd noticed the favoritism over the years, but hadn't felt it was their place to say anything. It was validating, but also exhausting. Lily, of course, doubled down. She accused me of playing the victim and claimed I was exaggerating everything. But her facade started to crack when one of her former bandmates chimed in. This person, let's call her Rachel, commented on one of Lily's posts, calling her out for lying. Rachel explained that Lily hadn't been some tragic victim of betrayal by her bandmates. They'd been upfront with her from the start, telling her she was a temporary member filling in for someone who'd moved away. According to Rachel, the band had even warned Lily not to drop out of college. They knew music wasn't her strong suit and didn't want her making a decision she'd regret. But Lily ignored them, convinced she was destined for stardom. When they found a more serious, talented vocalist, the choice to let Lily go had been an easy one. Rachel also revealed that Lily had lied about paying her own way through college. She'd bragged to the band about how our parents covered her tuition while they worked part-time to afford theirs. I couldn't believe what I was reading. When Rachel's comments started gaining traction, Lily deleted her posts and went silent. She'd been caught, and there was no talking her way out of it. But the damage was done. I realized then that this wasn't just about my parents or Lily anymore. This was about me reclaiming my life and refusing to let their toxicity define me. I decided to double down on my boundaries and focus on what really mattered, my future. A few days after the social media drama died down, I met with my grandparents to talk everything through. They reassured me that cutting off my parents and Lily was the right move. My grandpa even joked, "Better late than never, kiddo." We also talked about the money they'd promised me. At first, I felt awkward about accepting it, but they insisted. "This isn't about the money," my grandma said. "It's about supporting someone who deserves it." Their words meant the world to me. For once, I felt seen and valued for who I was, not for what I could do for someone else. As I write this, I'm starting to realize how much my life has changed in just a few weeks. Cutting off my parents and Lily was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also one of the best. I'll share more about how things unfolded in part 4. For now, just know this: I'm finally standing up for myself, and it feels incredible. After the dust settled from the social media blow-up, I thought things might finally calm down. I was wrong. My parents, as predictable as ever, tried to claw their way back into my life. It started with them showing up at my graduation, uninvited. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. For months, they'd shown zero interest in celebrating my accomplishments. But now, with the financial support from my grandparents redirected to me, they suddenly decided my graduation was worth attending. They didn't have passes to get into the ceremony, so they waited outside the venue. When I walked out with my grandparents, there they were, smiling like everything was fine. My dad stepped forward, arms open for a hug, but I stopped him right there. I quote, "I'll talk to you after everything is over," I said firmly. They looked stunned, but didn't argue. I wasn't going to let them ruin the day I had worked so hard for. Once the ceremony and celebrations with my grandparents wrapped up, we met my parents for lunch at a nearby restaurant. I made it clear that I didn't want any drama or emotional outbursts. This was their chance to explain themselves, and I was willing to listen, but on my terms. As soon as we sat down, the apologies started. They admitted they'd treated me unfairly and acknowledged that their favoritism toward Lily had been a huge mistake. My mom even cried, saying she was sorry for all the hurt they'd caused me over the years. At first, I wanted to believe them. It was everything I'd been waiting to hear for so long, but the more they talked, the less genuine it felt. Their apologies seemed rehearsed, like they were saying what they thought I wanted to hear rather than truly understanding the damage they'd done. And then came the excuses. "We were just trying to help Lily get back on her feet," my dad said. "She's been through so much." That was their go-to line. Lily needed them more than I did. It was as if all the sacrifices I'd made, all the struggles I'd faced alone, didn't matter because I was stronger and could handle it. I told them point blank that their reasoning didn't justify their actions. "You didn't just help Lily, you enabled her, and in doing so, you ignored me and my needs. That's not parenting, that's favoritism." My grandparents backed me up. My grandpa didn't mince words, reminding my parents how they'd lied about Lily's situation to keep receiving money. He told them they had no right to ask for forgiveness until they took full accountability for their actions. But my parents weren't ready to take that step. Instead, they started guilt-tripping me. My mom pulled the classic, "We're your parents, you owe us forgiveness" card, and my dad chimed in about how they'd forgiven me for every mistake I'd made growing up. That comparison was laughable. "You're comparing the mistakes I made as a child to the choices you made as adults," I said. "That's not the same thing." I told them I wasn't ready to forgive them yet, and if they were truly sorry, they'd give me the space I needed to heal. Instead of respecting my boundaries, they doubled down, accusing me of being ungrateful and stubborn. My mom even started crying again, hoping her tears would soften me up. But I wasn't falling for it. Years of dealing with their emotional manipulation had toughened me up. I calmly told her to stop, reminding her that we were in a public place. "If you're going to make a scene," I said, "I'll leave with Grandpa and Grandma right now." That seemed to snap them out of it. They quieted down and we finished lunch in awkward silence. Before leaving, they congratulated me in the most half-hearted way possible, and I couldn't help but feel relieved when they walked out the door. My grandparents stayed by my side, reassuring me that I'd done the right thing. "You stood your ground, Ethan," my grandpa said. "That's all that matters." In the days that followed, my parents tried to contact me again, but I ignored their calls and messages. Even Lily reached out, which was surprising given how she'd avoided me since the social media drama. She didn't apologize, of course. Instead, she demanded I fix things with our parents, saying they needed the financial support more than I did. Her entitlement was unbelievable. She claimed she wasn't emotionally ready to get a job and was still healing from everything she'd been through. It was laughable, really. She had spent the past year doing nothing while everyone around her bent over backward to accommodate her. I blocked her, along with my parents, on every platform. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I didn't feel guilty or conflicted about my decision. I felt empowered. My grandparents had my back, and I had a clear path forward. But I knew this wasn't the end. My parents and Lily weren't the type to back down easily, and there was bound to be more fallout. Still, I was ready for whatever came next. The silence from my parents and Lily didn't last long. About a week after I blocked them, Lily resurfaced on social media with a fresh round of posts. This time, her narrative was even more twisted. She painted herself as the black sheep who'd been abandoned by her own family, while I was some opportunistic villain taking advantage of our grandparents' generosity. Her posts were dramatic, filled with vague statements like, "Some people will use anything, even family, to climb higher," and "It's sad when the ones you trust turn out to be the biggest liars." She didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. At first, I thought about ignoring her. After all, the people who really mattered to me knew the truth. But then I started getting messages from mutual friends asking what was going on. Some were genuinely curious, while others subtly implied they thought I was in the wrong. I realized that staying silent would only let Lily control the narrative, so I decided to respond. One final time, I made a single detailed post explaining everything. I laid out the facts clearly and logically, starting with how my parents had always favored Lily and how I'd been left to fend for myself. I talked about the years of emotional neglect, their decision to skip my graduation for Lily's party, and how my grandparents had stepped in to support me when my parents refused. I also addressed Lily's lies, including the truth about her time in the band and her false claims about paying her way through college. I ended the post by saying I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted the truth to be out there. The response was overwhelming. Messages started pouring in, most of them supportive. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to say they admired my courage and honesty. Even a few of Lily's former friends messaged me, saying they'd always suspected something was off about her stories but hadn't wanted to get involved. Lily, predictably, didn't take it well. She deleted her posts and blocked me, which honestly felt like a win. My parents, however, tried to escalate things. They started calling my grandparents, begging them to talk sense into me. My grandparents didn't budge. In fact, my grandpa told my dad, "If you were half the parent you think you are, Ethan wouldn't need us to step in." That effectively ended the conversation. For the next few weeks, I focused on building my future. With graduation behind me, I started job hunting. Thanks to my hard work and connections, I landed a great position at a company I'd always admired. It felt good to finally see my efforts paying off. My grandparents continued to be my biggest supporters. They were there for me every step of the way, from celebrating my new job to helping me move into my first apartment. Their support wasn't just financial, it was emotional. They made me feel valued in a way my parents never had. As for my parents and Lily, I decided to stay out of contact. They'd shown me who they were, and I wasn't willing to let them back into my life. Just because they suddenly decided they wanted to make amends. That didn't mean they stopped trying. Every now and then, I'd hear from a mutual friend or extended family member about how my parents were heartbroken or how Lily was struggling. But I stayed firm. I knew letting them back in would only lead to more manipulation and hurt. Over time, the drama started to fade. My life became quieter and more peaceful. Without the constant stress of my parents and Lily, I had the space to focus on myself. I started going to therapy, which helped me process everything I'd been through and build healthier boundaries. Looking back, I'm proud of how far I've come. Cutting off my parents and Lily wasn't easy. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. But it was also the best thing I could have done for myself. Now, when I think about family, I think about my grandparents. They're the ones who've stood by me through everything, who've shown me what unconditional love really looks like. As for my parents and Lily, I don't hate them, but I don't miss them either. They made their choices and I've made mine. This whole experience taught me that sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who love you for who you are, and who make you feel like you matter. And for me, that's enough. Story 2. After rejecting me more than 8 years ago, a family wants me to spend Christmas with them. Do you need guidance on whether or not to go? My family has invited me back after I was disowned 8 years ago. After receiving contradictory advice from my friends, I gave my 27-year-old wife and kid a girl for Christmas. One of my friends advised me to share my predicament here in order to get feedback from strangers on the internet. Out of 4 siblings, the youngest. I am a man, 26-year-old. My father is 53 years old and my mother is 51. My siblings are my 26-year-old twin brother Carl, a 30-year-old man named Michael, and a 27-year-old woman named Sarah. It's worth noting that athletes make up the majority of my family. For this reason, I've always felt different while maturing. In school, my dad was a standout basketball player for Adidas. My mother was a volleyball player. Michael was a soccer player. Carl was the football team's standout running back, while Sarah played softball. Archery, which my family referred to as a sissy activity, piqued my curiosity more than any of other athletic activities. I had to almost beg my parents to attend my tournaments because they were usually interested in my brothers and seldom ever showed up for my activities. Even though my parents only went to one of the roughly 20 tournaments I competed in between the ages of 14 and 16, I never felt abandoned by them. They were never emotionally there for me as a teenager, though. In contrast to my siblings. Every time I attempted to bring this up with them, they disregarded me as an attention seeker, which annoyed me. However, this is not the only explanation for my sense of loneliness in my own family. I started seeing Amy, a 25-year-old woman in my grade at the time, when I was 15. I introduced her to my parents after we had been dating for 6 or 7 months, and they were quite fond of her. Even though I was young, I could imagine us working together in the future. One of Amy's former acquaintances informed me nearly 3 years later that she had been having affairs with me for a few months at a time. When I confronted her, she revealed that the man was my twin brother, even though I didn't know who he was. She essentially told me that she loved me at first. That is nothing compared to the love Mother had for my brother. When I confronted Carl at home later that day, I was so furious that I gave him a sucker punch and knocked him unconscious. I admit that I was wrong to use violence, but it was the culmination of years of repressed resentment at him and the rest of the family. Fortunately, my family decided against taking legal action, so I was spared from having to face an adult trial in court. As a result, I was transferred to live with my paternal aunt, a 48-year-old lady who lived in a city about 2 hours away and had become distant from the family. Since then, I haven't communicated with them. It was difficult at first, but with the help of my aunts and her husband at 48 male, it progressed from wanting to be in a relationship with them. I attended a university in my aunt's city after transferring to a different high school, where I earned a degree in electrical engineering. Later, I met my wife, and at the time of my wedding, I married her. I considered asking them, but decided against it since I didn't want my wedding to become a drama. A year ago, my wife and I were blessed with a daughter and purchased a home an hour away from my home. A week or so ago, I got a Facebook message from a mother and father who wanted to get together at their place for Christmas. I informed them that I might have other plans, but I would think about it and get back to them with a definitive response shortly. Subsequently, I received strange friend requests from both Sarah and Michael. According to my wife, she and my daughter would spend Christmas at my father-in-law's place if I went. I agree with her perspective since she is 2 months pregnant and does not have to cope with unnecessary stress. I'm not sure if I should try to patch up my connection with my family for those who are reading this. Choosing a path of action is a difficult decision for me. On the one hand, it's possible that they want to apologize and regret what they did to me. However, if I attend, they could require that I apologize to Carl, which I don't want to do. Any guidance would be beneficial. Before you read the latest version, I would advise you to go at a later time. With your wife and child, enjoy Christmas. To find out whether your family has any hidden agendas, visit them during a less stressful period. It might be painful to you if they are only interested in seeing their grandkids and not you. Yes, I do agree. If you're thinking the same thing, go another time. It could have to do with the grandchildren. Have a child and your wife for Christmas. It's too big of an event to meet them at Christmas. Inform us as well. I am unable to let go of this post. It is inconceivable to me that parents would expel their child for betraying their other child. For financial reasons, they may wish to get back in touch. Grandchild? It's strange that even his siblings texted Opie, but I'm not sure why. But I hope it's for the right reasons. To be honest with them, I would spend Christmas away from my expectant wife. Perhaps I'm not seeing it, but why Christmas? Since they are the ones attempting to make things right, they could have contacted you at any time and offered you the opportunity to choose a time that works for you. I don't know for sure. I think it's weird. I wouldn't go myself unless you really want them back in your life. It all comes down to appearances. In order to avoid looking like a disgrace, they are trying to patch up the family after learning that Opie has a child and is doing well. Recall that many years ago they left their son behind. It feels like a deceptive situation. It's worth noting that they didn't start with any regret or indication of an apology. They want something: money, free work, and organ access to your babies, or just to look good to their friends. I quote, "I'm not saying don't go, but keep your expectations low. Be ready for the, we need you to do X for us in order to properly reconcile speech and have a quick exit prepared." I don't know. As a parent, I cannot fathom going no contact with one of my children for 8 years after my other child did something so cruel to him, so he hit him. That is just inconceivable to me. Now, totally understand if my son hit his brother. If he ever did something like that, may be wrong. And I know I'm not supposed to say that, but we're all still human. Whether you can move past the fact they abandoned you to your arms and turned their backs for 8 years is your choice. But personally, I don't know if I could. If you can't and don't want to see them again, I doubt anyone would blame you. If they do, they don't know the full story. If they do know the full story, then they're not worth your time either. And now for the latest news. I wanted to post earlier, but some things got in the way. My wife started experiencing excruciating pain in her abdomen area just 2 days after Christmas, making it almost impossible for her to stand. Her sister, a 30-year-old woman, and I rushed her to the hospital. It was there that we received the devastating news that my wife had endured a miscarriage, requiring immediate removal of the fetus. The most difficult task for me was honestly explaining the complications surrounding the operation to my wife. My wife was forced to stay for 2 more days. Honestly, I have been trying to stay strong for my wife and my daughter, but honestly, I'm struggling right now. Also, the revisions of the original post. Most of you that replied on the same day article had warned me not to spend Christmas with them because of the significance of that holiday. I agree and decided I would spend the remainder of the holidays with my wife. They never made time for me, so why should I make time for them? When I texted them this, I anticipated they would attempt to dispute with me, but rather they stated they appreciated my perspective and could not wait to see me after the holidays. I began to do some investigating into my relatives to attempt to figure out why they had reached out. Michael is a corporate lawyer who works for a large corporation in my city, but glancing through his Facebook profile, she has 2 kids and was married to his wife in 2016. Sarah looks to be married to a doctor. She herself, 8 years ago, is studying to be a nurse, and they have a son together. I have a buddy that lives in my hometown and has parents who are friends with my parents. When I questioned her about Sarah, she informed me that Sarah had divorced her first spouse, the one she was seeing 8 years earlier after he had committed mail fraud. Carl was married to Amy Wise after high school and they had 2 kids together. I cannot quite figure out what he or his wife does for a livelihood through Facebook, but considering that they bought a huge house last year in the midst of a pandemic, tells me they are not truly hurting. My dad looks to be going through a midlife crisis, and my mother is extremely into the health community, and then proceeded to enumerate the reasons of why they wanted to perhaps reach out to me now. Since my wife and I made more money together 8 years ago than my parents did, it is quite improbable that money is the reason I am not receiving financial aid. This idea is further supported by the fact that my siblings are not having financial difficulties. However, organ donation could play a role. It doesn't seem likely. Nevertheless, one reviewer raised the idea that Kaval, who is my twin, would be the most suitable match for me. In spite of this, I don't think it's plausible because he was just mentioned in a Facebook post written just before Christmas. 3 things about my daughter. They could be contacting me in an attempt to establish a relationship with my kid, but I'm not really sure. I don't understand why my parents want to meet my daughter when she isn't their first granddaughter. Because my wife's Facebook account was open to the public, they most certainly discovered the existence of my daughter. She contacted my aunt after becoming private on her account. After I informed her about the problem, she gave me an explanation of why they had finally gotten in touch with me, to comprehend the circumstances. You must comprehend the reasons for my aunt's estrangement. My 76-year-old grandmother and my 79-year-old paternal grandfather had 4 children. My aunt was the 3rd oldest and my dad was the 2nd. After graduating from college, my aunt started seeing her partner and came out to her parents as bisexual. She was instantly rejected by my grandparents, who also forbade any communication with her. But my grandfather started contacting people around 4 years ago. My grandfather had been inquiring about me and my life around a month ago. He wanted to know if I was married and had children. In response, my aunt chastised my grandfather for his interest in me when he defended Carl's actions. At that point, everything changes. My grandfather informed my aunt that I deserved to be cut off from Amy since I had cheated on her with one of her close friends. My grandfather despises cheating since he is a devout man. My family had informed him that I had confessed to Amy after someone I had reportedly cheated with came forward. She needed the consolation and support of Carl and Sarah. However, after learning of this, I went over to Carl and Sarah and viciously attacked them. I didn't touch Sarah, even though she was the one who attempted to separate Carl and me. And I didn't treat Carl that way. I heard this from my aunt. I was shocked beyond belief. They created a huge and horrible lie about me, which they disseminated widely, and I was unable to comprehend the depth of their hatred for me. Later, when my aunt told me that Grandpa was shocked since he had always had a good impression of Carl, she told him the full truth, including what had really happened. My grandma was even more astonished, but she refused to share my number when I begged my aunt for it. It determined the reason my parents and siblings sought to contact me. It turns out that my grandfather threatened to cut off my parents and siblings from his estate if they would not offer an apology for their treatment of me and invite me to join the family for Christmas dinner. For background, he is a multimillionaire. Thus they contacted me not to express regret for the wrongs they had done to me in the past, but rather because they knew they would not receive anything from Grandpa if they didn't. What a group of avaricious individuals. My aunt informed me of this, therefore I made the decision to block them all. For what reason should I answer them now? To me, they're all dead. I have to provide for my wife. Considering what she endured at a household that values my in-laws and myself. But this is not the end of it. 3 days after New Year's Eve, I got a call on my work phone from an unidentified number. I quote, "We've been used to getting calls from unknown numbers because of my line of work." But I was shocked to recognize my grandfather's voice when I picked up this specific call. He most likely immediately got my contact details from the website of my business. He started by apologizing for not trying to get in touch with me during the previous 8 years. For missing important events like my wedding, graduation, and the birth of my kid, he truly apologizes. I didn't mind his cutting me off because we weren't that close before. He informed me over the phone later that he was so dissatisfied with the rest of my family that he was adding me to his will and severing their ties. To be completely honest, I have no idea how to feel about that. While I agree that many would be beneficial, I also don't want him to use those to pressure me into dating my daughter. We spoke for around 30 minutes. I once thought that maybe I might get along well with my grandfather because of the manner to call. However, he then said something that truly infuriated me. For background, he informed me that my daughter had not adopted a family name, and he was upset. The question of what last name to use as a pair arose after my wife and I were married. I was unable to adopt my wife's last name for legal reasons, but as a couple, we agreed that all of our future children would have her last name. This is when I let my grandfather down. I warned him to never get in touch with me again after calling him a senile old guy and saying a lot of other harsh things. I will not let this man's audacity serve as a justification for what I have gone through. I refuse to be controlled by the wealth I inherited. Even if I do wind up with the money, I want to give it to a local nonprofit. But it's quite unlikely given his track record of dishonesty. Even though these past several weeks have been extremely difficult, I'm committed to overcoming them. Both my wife's and my in-laws' Facebook accounts are private, yet they do. It's beyond me to try to get in touch with me. How? To try to locate me, they would most likely use a private investigator. I think they are unaware of my residence, but you never know. I've considered obtaining a restraining order, but it will be challenging because there are attorneys in the family. Before my last article was removed for whatever reason, I didn't really have time to respond to any of the questions that were asked. I'll try my best to respond to any queries over the course of the next day or two, but after that, I'll stop using the website. I appreciate all of your advice, and I hope this new year brings you all the best. Obi. I sincerely apologize for your loss. The anguish you and your spouse must be going through at this moment is beyond my comprehension. There are some of the worst people your family has ever encountered, and their combined effing chutzpah is astounding. You should stop wasting your efforts on them. Go ahead and screw them all. I genuinely hope that they will stop pursuing you so you may focus on your family in the comfort of your own home. I appreciate you giving us revisions, and I will think about your family. I really hope your wife recovers quickly, and I apologize for your loss. Please don't let such people impact you, even though your family has had a difficult few weeks. Apart from Grandpa's terrible remarks regarding the last name, I must admit that at least the truth is out to discredit those individuals. Grant, but if the money arrives to you before you take action, you can keep it. Consider it. You choose nice folks to be your family when you're at ease. Your in-laws, wife, and daughter are all important. You can send the others to hell. I'm sorry for your child's passing and for everything you've gone through. Keep in mind that your family loves you and that you have support. They adore you and they want you, even if your siblings and parents aren't those individuals. You're not by yourself. Seek professional assistance and support for both you and your spouse. You "We've been through a lot. Unfortunately, there has been a delay due to the new variation. Your grandpa may have been convinced to ignore your aunt's claims and give your family their rightful inheritance if you shared the load with him, especially because they tried to make your son seem very distressed and highlighted any small disagreements with him. Although it was reasonable for you to be insulted, he eventually decided to hurt you rather than find a solution. The man must be elderly and possess traditional values. Have you attempted to explain that? It's a common practice in today's culture. Or did you get angry right away? You've been going through a pretty difficult period, to be honest, and I guess it was the final nail in the coffin, correct? I only thought you would desire a different viewpoint. You have my undying love, man. I sincerely hope that your 2022 improves and that your misses get better soon. To be honest, I don't care how he perceives me at the moment. I'm not interested in dating him based on a lot of factors. In the first place, my aunts and grandfather never really had a relationship, but this could destroy it. Story 3. The title of this article is Sister-in-Law, The Cops on Me. My refusal to watch her children has caused her life to collapse. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Sarah, my sister-in-law, and I had a great babysitting agreement for years. When the epidemic ruined everyone's life in March 2020, we began it. 3 days a week, I would watch her children, and she would watch mine. There was no money exchanged, no nonsense, no drama. It was a win-win situation, and we kept it in good working order for 3 whole years. We would give each other plenty of warning if something came up, like grown-ups. After one pointless fight, Sarah made the decision to disregard all of it. A few weeks prior, we got into this small argument. I can't even recall the topic of it. That was how unimportant it was. Sarah, however, seems to have taken offense. I didn't think much about it since I assumed she would calm down after a day. As I had done 100 times before, I dropped my kids off at her apartment the next morning. I didn't enter at all. That wasn't out of the ordinary for us. We would wait in the car, let the kids get in, and then drive away once the door opened if one of us was pressed for time or simply didn't feel like interacting with others. I didn't give it any second thought. When I saw her door open, I waved before leaving for work. During my roughly 40-minute trip, I just lost myself in music, completely oblivious to the fact that bad things were going to happen. My stomach fell when I finally arrived at work and looked at my phone. Sarah had left me 20 missed calls and many SMS. She began the SMS by stating that she was not minding my children that day due to our disagreement. Then she started complaining that I was ignoring her. She threatened to call the police in the last several texts if I didn't pick up my kids in 45 minutes. What I was reading was unbelievable. I apologized for not receiving her messages sooner and contacted her right away. I clarified that I was driving with my phone on quiet. I'm not a fool who texts and drives, you know. She interrupted me when I said I would leave work early to come fetch the kids. I'll call the police unless you give me 45 minutes. With a smug air, as if she believed she was helping me, she said, I couldn't speak. On their own family, who the devil calls the police? I make a living working with children. My career would be ruined if I had any records pertaining to child abandonment. Despite being aware of this, Sarah continued to act in this manner. Nevertheless, I informed her that I needed to finish off some tasks at work before I could depart. Even if my supervisor was sympathetic, I couldn't pick up and leave everything at once. It was a little more than an hour later when I returned to Sarah's house. My children were standing on the porch looking terrified, while 2 police cars were parked in front of Sarah's house, their lights blazing. I felt like puking. Sarah was looking arrogant and righteous as she stood there chatting to the cops as if she were the unfortunate victim of this whole situation. I stepped out of my car, inhaled deeply, and went up to them. Initially, I wanted to scream at Sarah in front of everyone, but I realized I couldn't. I then sought to explain what had transpired to the police. There has been a miscommunication. I assured them that I didn't desert my children. Like I've done 100 times before, I dropped them off here this morning. However, it wasn't until I got to work that I noticed her message stating that she couldn't watch them. One of the cops gave me a look as though he had heard this tale countless times. Did you miss her messages? He questioned, doubtful. No, I answered, attempting to seem calm. My phone was on quiet while I was driving. When I read the messages, I immediately contacted her back and informed her that I was en route. I arrived as quickly as possible. Naturally, Sarah had to add her voice. I couldn't watch them today, as I mentioned. She lost her temper. Before leaving them here, you need to have looked at your phone. You are responsible for this. My blood was boiling, but I managed to control myself. The text was not visible to me. Sarah, I'm not going to contact the police because of it. I work with children, you know. What would this have done to me, do you know? She simply shrugged as if it didn't matter. The police officers appeared to be trying to avoid becoming entangled in our family's problems. At last, one of them said, All right, it sounds like there's a communication problem. This place is crime-free. Therefore, we are not submitting any reports. Just make sure that this doesn't occur once more. After they departed, I gathered my children and loaded them into the car. Sarah had to give the last word, but I didn't even glance at her as I made my way back to my car. Perhaps you'll check your phone the next time, I heard her shout after me. It wasn't my fault, it was yours. I didn't answer. I was unable to. It would have been a series of words that would have likely made me appear to be the insane one if I had said something. I chose to drive home after slamming the vehicle door and tried to calm the fuck down for the remainder of the day. The days that followed were a haze. I was unable to stop mentally reliving everything. The police, the arrogant expression on Sarah's face. My children are frightened on that porch. The fact that I even had to give the cops an explanation. My blood boiled again because of that. She was an experienced practitioner. She was fully aware of the stakes for me. Nevertheless, she did it. Sarah dared to text me a couple of days later. I suppose I may have overreacted, she said. Quote, Is it possible to resume the previous babysitting schedule? I spent at least 5 minutes staring at the message, unsure of whether to reply or simply block her. I ultimately came to the conclusion that she needed to hear my actual thoughts. Sarah, no, I answered. We will not return to anything. You reported me to the police on your own family. You were aware of the potential harm that could have been done to me, yet you chose to ignore it. Therefore, no, I will never again watch your children. Almost instantly, she tried to turn it back on me by saying, Figure it out. None of this would have occurred, she said, if you had checked your phone or talked to me when you dropped them off. I told you that if I had been in your shoes, I would have handled it differently. I was astounded by this woman's courage. If you believe that I am to blame for this, you are completely insane. I fired back. I quote, am done with you because you've gone too far. I didn't respond to her repeated texts, which were an attempt to shame me into forgiving her. I assumed it would be the last time I blocked her number. Not at all. Spoiler warning. My brother Mike phoned me a few days later. Mike is normally a laid-back man, but he gets really whipped around Sarah. His first statement that he only wanted to chat soon devolved into him shouting at me, "Why are you unable to let this go?" "Oh," he said. "Sarah said she was sorry. She is aware that she overreached. We are related. Are you truly willing to let one error to wreck everything? One error," I yelled at Mike. On me, she summoned the filthy police. "Do you know what may have occurred if I hadn't been believed by the police? It would have ended my career." She didn't care since she knew that. She was furious. "That made it okay," he said. "Are you truly going to harbor resentment for this? Man, you're letting us down." Our current inability to pay for childcare forced Sarah to resign from her position. "Are you even aware of the harm this is causing us?" I told him it was not my concern. "Your bed was created by you two. Lay in it now." Mike went off accusing me of being self-centered and destroying the family. After telling him to get lost, I hung up. I knew I was going to have another episode of guilt tripping when my mother phoned. She did indeed begin with, "You are acting irrationally." Sarah said she was sorry. "Why are you unable to simply forgive her?" I answered, "Because this isn't about an apology, Mom. She didn't just let me down. She jeopardized my whole career. And now that she's facing the repercussions of her behavior, you're attempting to make me feel horrible. I'm finished." She obviously didn't understand. She added that I was being immature and that I should consider the impact this was having on the family. I informed her that rather than Sarah and Mike, I was thinking about my own family, my children, and myself. I hung up the phone after that. It was terrible enough that Sarah called the police on me, but the consequences of that choice were going to affect the whole family in ways that none of us could have predicted. I believed there was no way things could get worse. A Mike blasted up my phone with his guilt-tripping garbage when Sarah called the police on me. But it seems like I didn't realize how entitled and self-centered these two could be. The worst part was when my mother began to bear the financial and symbolic costs of their carelessness. Sarah left her kids with my mother after she quit her job, and it seems that my mother believed it was her responsibility to clean up the mess. I didn't care at first. When Sarah pulled her typical shit on me, I assumed my mom had learned her lesson because she had been supporting Sarah and said I was exaggerating. It was not long before the Fishers appeared. Every time I visited my mom, she appeared more and more worn out. She would not admit she was overwhelmed, but she did complain about being exhausted. She was clearly exhausted from watching Sarah's children 3 days a week, even though I knew she was attempting to keep it together. Then I received a call at work one day. My mother was there and she sounded awful. She said she didn't feel good while panting heavily. My stomach dropped right away. I hurried over to her apartment and ordered her to remain put. She appeared sickly and pale when I arrived. She sat on the couch as if she were having trouble standing. She told me that she had a headache that wouldn't go away and that her chest felt constricted when I inquired what was wrong. I brought her to the doctor since I didn't want to take any chances. It became out that she had extremely high blood pressure. Dangerously elevated. According to the doctor, she should take it easy and not worry. I knew precisely what was stressing her up, of course. Sarah with her children. However, despite this, my mother would not directly blame Sarah. "These are my grandchildren." When I brought it up, she said, I tried to seem cool as I continued, "I can't just stop helping Mom. Assisting is one thing. Another is to let them run you over. Their children are not your responsibility. Mike and Sarah are responsible for that." She let out a sigh but remained silent. She wasn't yet ready to confront them, but I was more than prepared to do so. I was at my mom's house the next time Sarah stopped by to drop off her kids. I didn't intend to be there, but I stopped by to see how she was doing, and Sarah appeared beaming, pretended that she wasn't venting her troubles on an ailing woman. "Hello, Mother." With a trill, she led her children inside. "I'll return at about 6. Before my mother could say anything, I intervened. "You won't, in fact." I crossed my arms as I spoke. Sarah froze, staring at me as though I had just given her a smack. "What are you saying?" Her tone was instantly defensive as she asked, "You're not abandoning your children here anymore, are you?" I said, "Mom just left the disgusting doctor's office because of her blood pressure, and she doesn't need to watch your kids while you spend the entire day sitting on your ass." Sarah's cheeks flushed. She yelled, "I'm not sitting on my ass. While Mike works, I'm taking care of things at home. Are you aware of how difficult it is to handle everything?" Yes, I do, I fired back. And you know what? You are accountable for it. Not your mother's, not yours. Try to figure things out. Of course, my mother tried to step in. Ashley, that's sufficient. Later, we may discuss this. We can't, Mom. I turned to her and spoke. Look where you've ended up because you've been going above and above for them. In the physician's office. Stop now. Meanwhile, Sarah was furious. That is not for you to determine. She gave a hiss. Mom and I are the only ones involved. It's like hell. I said, because you and Mike can't work things out, you're endangering her health. I will not allow this to go on. Muttering to herself that I was spoiling everything, she hurried out with her children. Whether or not she believed she could coerce me into giving in didn't matter to me. She was completely mistaken. For a while I believed the encounter may serve as a wake-up call. No, Sarah didn't need it. As if nothing had occurred, she dropped her children down at my mom's place the very following week. Later that day. My mother apologized over the phone for not confronting Sarah. She said, I just don't know how to say no to her. I always feel bad for her. I said, trying not to become angry, Mom, you must cease allowing her to control you. Until you put your foot down, she won't stop. I understand, she muttered. However, what about the children? None of this was requested by them. Furthermore, you are not accountable for them, I reminded her. It's possible to love them without allowing their mother to dominate you. My mom's return to the hospital a week later was the tipping point. The doctor cautioned her that she needed to make significant adjustments or risk having a stroke when her blood pressure soared once more. Something inside of me shattered when I saw her like that, hooked up to monitors, looking so frail. I lost control when Mike arrived to take up Sarah's children. I went straight to the hospital and addressed him. Mom is being killed by you and Sarah, I told him straight up. I vow to God that I will contact the police personally if you ever leave your children with her again. He rolled his eyes and replied, Don't be silly. She enjoys observing them. She wishes to assist. Bullshit. I lost my temper. She's too kind to refuse. And that's what you're doing. Because you and Sarah are incapable of raising your own damn children, you are endangering her health. That did not sit well with Mike. He became irate, accusing me of being too emotional and making things more difficult for everyone. I told him that if they couldn't manage their crap, I didn't care. They were to blame for that, not me, and certainly not my mother. I informed my mother she needed to quit babysitting later that evening when we sat down. This must end, even though I love you, Mom. I said, more than enough has been done by you. Now is the moment to prioritize yourself. She sobbed. She obviously detested feeling as though she was disappointing others, even those who weren't deserving of her generosity. However, I believe the message was ultimately made clear during the second hospital visit. She consented to inform Mike and Sarah that she was no longer able to watch their children. I didn't care that Sarah and Mike wouldn't like it, even though I knew there would be a fight. Whether they liked it or not, they had to start taking charge of their own darn lives. After my mom's hospital visit, you would think Sarah and Mike would figure it out, but they didn't. These two simply continued to assert their rights. They pretended like my mom had just betrayed them when she eventually informed them that she could no longer babysit. Sarah broke down in tears, expressing how difficult it was for her to handle everything and claiming that her mother had promised to assist. Mike adopted his typical passive-aggressive stance. He called me in a rage and tried to blame me for everything, as if I had turned their mother against them. Are you content now? He growled. You had to become involved, so Mom won't assist anymore. Yes, I am glad I retaliated since it will save her from having to visit the hospital once more, thanks to the nonsense of you and your wife. He said, she wants to help. Everyone is having a tougher time because of you. You're making things more difficult for everyone, Mike. I remarked that you and Sarah are really lazy and believe that everyone else should take the burden. You two nearly caused Mom to have an awful stroke, and you're still behaving like the victims have grown up. After that, he hung up on me, but I didn't mind. I was done trying to talk sense into his head. It was his and Sarah's fault if they continued to dig their own graves. It wasn't going to keep me up at night. My mother called me a few days later. I became tense the moment she sounded apprehensive. Ashley. Once more, Sarah dropped off the children. Her voice trembled as she said, I became enraged. What the devil? You told her you were no longer able to do it, Mom. I did, she muttered. However, she just stated she would return later and left them here. That was it. I'd had enough. Sarah didn't answer when I phoned her. I left her a voicemail, as is customary. I'll call the filthy police if you don't take up your kids in 45 minutes. And I'm not bluffing like you are. Look yourself in the eye. To be honest, it felt nice to give her a taste of her own medicine, even though I was quivering with anger as I hung up. About half an hour later, Sarah arrived, as I had anticipated. She stormed into my mom's house and yelled at me for being so irrational. "You're going too far with this." She let out a scream. "You wouldn't really report me to the police." "Give me a try," I remarked, crossing my arms and leaning on the counter. "Since you were more than willing to do it to me, why should I not?" I ignored her constant tirades about how I was exaggerating the situation. I just looked at her till she picked up her children and walked away. I didn't feel bad at all, but my mom looked horrified. Someone had to confront Sarah, and I would do it if my mother was unable to, naturally. Later that evening, Mike gave me a call to see how I was doing. "Why are you acting so strangely?" he shouted. "Are you genuinely saying that you will now call the police on us? You're going too far with this. That's an issue now. I retaliated when someone threatened to call the police. Perhaps you ought to have considered it when Sarah did the same thing to me." Mike disputed that she was furious. "That wasn't how she meant it." I responded, "Well, I'm upset now, and I do mean it. You two are a complete train wreck, and I will not allow you to bring me or my mother down with you. Get your act together. This family is being torn apart by you," he yelled. "No, Mike, you're doing that alone with Sarah." Before he could answer, I said and hung up the phone. Sarah tried her typical routine the following week, dropping the kids off at my mom's house without asking. However, I wasn't going to overlook it this time. I didn't call because I had already warned her. I reported an abandonment issue to the police non-emergency line right away. I informed them that an elderly woman who was ill was unable to care for the two children that were left. When the police arrived, Sarah was furious as hell. While they were still there, she barged into my mom's house and yelled about how I was destroying her life. She shouted at me, "This is your fault. My family is being destroyed by you. You're ruining your own family, Sarah." Calmly, I said, "You've been ignoring your obligations to others, and now they're coming back to haunt you." She was forced to take her children by the officers, who also cautioned her against leaving them with an unfit caretaker. Her expression was priceless. Even though she wanted to argue, she was too foolish to do so. The fallout from their mess was just getting started. But Sarah and Mike stopped attempting to involve my mom. After that. Mike was putting in extra hours to compensate for Sarah's lost income, and she was finding it difficult to manage the children alone. It was obvious that their marriage was strained. To make matters worse for everyone, Mike even began spending a few nights a week at my mom's house. Of course, my mother was upset. She detested witnessing the disintegration of the family, but I reminded her that Sarah and Mike were solely to blame. What they sowed is coming back to them. I told her that fixing it was not her responsibility, and that this was not her fault. She nodded, but it was clear that she was still conflicted. That's my mother's problem. Even she was beginning to realize that Sarah and Mike couldn't be helped, but she's too good for herself. Sarah and Mike appeared to finally understand the message following the police visit. The fallout was already well underway when they stopped dropping their children off at my mom's house. To put it mildly, Sarah was struggling to keep up with her children while she was cooped up at home. The rifts in their marriage were widening daily, and Mike was working tirelessly to pay their bills. When my mother informed me that Mike had begun spending some nights at her house, I wasn't shocked. Apparently, the incessant fighting was driving him crazy, so he needed some space from Sarah. I could see my mom was concerned, but she tried to act as though it wasn't a huge deal. She kept saying things like, "Family shouldn't be this way," and "I just want everyone to get along." Even though I adore my mother, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "It's not about getting along, Mom. They're lying in the bed that Sarah and Mike made," she said, her voice breaking. "This is on them, not us, but Ashley. What if it doesn't work out? What if their family is destroyed by this?" I sighed. If their family is falling apart, that's because they refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. You can't keep fixing everything for them. Meanwhile, Sarah started spreading her version of the story to anyone who would listen according to her. I was the villain who refused to help my own family in their time of need. She left out the part where she called the cops on me. Naturally. Instead, she painted herself as a struggling mom, just trying to do her best, while I selfishly turned my back on them. I started getting calls from extended family members, all parroting Sarah's bullshit. "Why can't you just help them out?" one aunt asked. "It's not like you're doing anything wrong, but you're making their lives so much harder." "Oh, I'm making their lives harder. I lost my temper. Did Sarah tell you she called the bloody cops on me? Because that's why we're here. The silence on the other end of the line was always golden. I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative and make me out to be the bad guy. The drama hit its peak about a month later when Mike showed up at my mom's house in the middle of the night. He was drunk off his ass and rambling about how he couldn't take it anymore. And yes, before you ask, I'd warned my mom not to let him stay there, but she's too soft-hearted to turn him away. When I found out the next morning, I called him, ready to let him have it. "Why are you acting so strangely, Mike? Showing up at Mom's house like that? She doesn't need this shit." "You don't understand, he slurred, clearly still hungover. "Sarah's driving me crazy. She's always bitching about how hard things are, and I'm the one working my ass off to keep us afloat. Well, maybe if you two had your shit together, you wouldn't be in this mess. I lost my temper, but well, keep blaming everyone else. That's been working nicely for you thus far. He started ranting, but I hung up before he could continue. I wasn't wasting any more energy on him. The last nail in the coffin came a few weeks later when Sarah formally resigned her job for good. She'd been attempting to hold on to a part-time employment, but between the cost of childcare and her incapacity to manage her kids without support, she quit up. Meantime, picked up even more hours at work, but it still wasn't enough. Their debts were piling up, and their savings, if they ever had any, were gone. I discovered out from my mom that they were considering moving back in with Sarah's parents many hours away. "They don't have many alternatives left," she replied, sounding truly sorry. "Excellent," I said bluntly. "Maybe they'll figure out how to handle their mess without pulling everyone else down with them." She didn't react, but I could see she was still clinging on to some optimism that things might change around. I didn't share her optimism. Mike and Sarah are examples of people who don't change unless compelled to. Even then, the chances are slim. A couple of weeks later, Mike called me. It was succinct and direct. "We're on the move," he remarked. "Asshole, thanks for nothing." I couldn't contain my laughter. "You're welcome." After saying that, I hung up. Sarah and Mike are currently not involved. Sarah's parents took them back into their home. Additionally, based on what I've heard, their relationship is in a precarious state. If I claimed to feel sorry for them, I would be lying. They caused this, and I'm not going to sleep poorly over it. Now that she is not taking care of their turmoil or babysitting, my mom is doing better. She continues to lament the dissolution of the family, but I tell her that we are not here to fix those who do not want to be mended. Personally, I've come to terms with the circumstances. To be honest, I'm fine with the fact that I don't think my relationship with Mike and Sarah will ever get better. Before they learn anything, some people must reach their lowest point, and even then, they may not change. When the day is over, my attention is focused on taking care of my own family. Mike and Sarah are free to continue playing the victim if they so want. I quote am finished.